You know when you're writing and you feel like something isn't coming through, like the plot is too intricate, or like the progression is making sense but the character personalities are getting lost and you're not capable of conveying them in the way that you want? Well, you know who doesn't have that problem? Bryan Lee O'Malley. Yeah, you only thought I'd talk about novels, huh? But no. Bryan Lee O'Malley is a writer, illustrator, and musician. He has all the three major art forms down pat. But seriously though, Bryan Lee O'Malley is one of my biggest inspirations as someone who is a writer and as someone who's trying to learn to draw or to illustrate so that they can one day turn some of their writing into comic books or just graphic novels. I really look up to Bryan Lee O'Malley, and there's so many things about him that are inspiring, from his work ethic to his mindset. Actually, I read an article the other day about how, like, his different inspirations and how he took inspiration from real life, and how despite all the hardships he faced, he still keeps it quirky, or he tries to grow up quirky. He tries to not lose that creative spark, that innocence inside him, and I think that's very admirable. Now, before I start, let me preface this by saying that when I'm talking about like non-strictly literary forms like comic books, I am pretty novice as a artist. Because of that, I feel like it would be disingenuous if I like said anything outside of I like it or I don't like it, in my personal opinion, for any piece of work, not just this. And in this case, I love it, to be honest. I love the artwork. It's very flashy. It has its own flair. I love the artwork in both of the pieces I'm about to discuss. Now, I also want to say that I've only read 2 works of Bryan Lee O'Malley, but honestly, I thought they were enough to sing his high praises. I love you. In both of them, I really liked the artwork, and they were in different sort of like eras of his progression as an artist and an illustrator, and also a writer, which is why I feel like they provide a bit of a timeline for his work. Now, the first one I read, and the one he's most known for, is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and this is one of my favorite comic book series of all time. Which got adapted into one of my favorite movies of all time, and got adapted into one of my favorite anime series of all time. It's phenomenal. I'm biased when I say this. I know that it's not the most literary, magnificent, intricate piece, and it's probably not the best pieces of fiction if you could quantify them in a semi-objective way, but genuinely, Scott Pilgrim is one of the most fun, most spirited pieces that still have a lot of cool and interesting literary techniques. I remember there's one scene that's, I believe, in the comics and the movie, where there's this wide shot of the apartment, or I guess in the movie it was like a panning shot of the apartment, and it was these little pins that show, like, there are these little pins in everything in the apartment, and they're labeled with who owns what. Basically, they're fictitious pills, not like real in real life, I suppose. But I thought that was such an interesting way of doing it, because as writers we're often told to show not tell, but this is sort of showing through telling, because instead of just saying, oh, everything in the apartment was owned by Wallace, imagine like if you were reading this as a novel, there could be one line where everything in the apartment was owned by Wallace. Or what he did instead is say effectively, oh, this is owned by Wallace, and this is owned by Wallace, and that's owned by Wallace, and that's owned by Wallace, which would obviously be very tedious to read and very pointless in a normal novel, but that is a creative way of deploying using the advantages of a comic book, is that you could just show us this as a scene, and it works. It conveys a lot of things. It implies that Scott Pilgrim is broke and that Wallace is generous, or that they're close. I understand that, like I mentioned earlier, it's hard to quantify a comic book from a literary perspective, or deploy comic book techniques in a literary sense, because they're just two separate mediums. However, Bryan Lee O'Malley still shows that he has a lot of interesting and unique writing techniques, like just pure writing. For example, in the second novel I read, which, can I just say, the art in it is beautiful. I really like the art in Scott Pilgrim, but this art was jump up. Like, you can see that he matured more as a writer and an illustrator in the period between this, like, the Scott Pilgrim series and this graphic novel. It was so beautiful. I highly recommend you read it, and it's very underrated. Now, in this graphic novel, the interesting writing technique I'm talking about is that the protagonist talks to herself. So the story is set almost from like a third person limited perspective, which implies that there's obviously a narrator, the third person, but like it's in such a way that the narrator, or like the protagonist, can hear the narrator. So the narrator could go like, oh, this made Katie feel sad, and Katie would respond, no, this didn't make Katie feel sad, Katie's totally fine. I understand that this has probably been done before, and it's kind of likened to Deadpool or other people who can break the fourth wall. However, I like its use case here because it conveys a lot more about the character. And with other fourth wall breaking people, it's either used as a bit, or it's the other way around, where the main it's from a first person perspective, but the first person is responding to a fictitious other voice, if that makes sense. So the focus isn't on the literary narrative perspective, it's on a first person perspective, and the voices are a second hand, or like a offhand thing. In other words, I really like its use case here. It conveys a lot of character, and it's just perfect. I really like this graphic novel, and it's so underrated. I would definitely say that I favor Scott Pilgrim more. However, it's clear to me that Seconds is the better work. It's the better like graphic novel or better piece of work. Both artistically and literarily, the story is just a lot better, a lot deeper. And I just favor Scott Pilgrim. Seconds is still 100% worth a read for anyone who likes comic books in general, or Bryan Lee O'Malley's work specifically. It's very underrated, and I love it so much. I'd say that Scott Pilgrim for me is a 10 out of 10. Seconds is a 9 out of 10. They're both phenomenal pieces of work. And so yeah, go read a Bryan Lee O'Malley work and go watch another one of my videos. And thank you for watching me. Winner.